Hello, hello. You're listening to the Better Workday podcast with me, Niamh Moynihan. Let's talk about distractions at work. Not being interrupted by other colleagues, not wasting our time in meaningless meetings, and not even procrastinating on the things we know we should be doing. But distraction, that is us taking our attention away from what we know we should be doing. I'm telling you now, when I used to work in corporate, I thought that the days where nothing went to plan was down to 2 or 3 different things. It was either because I was being constantly interrupted by my colleagues, by emails, by phone calls, by all the bits and pieces, or maybe there was an urgent request that I had to drop everything and deal with, or I was spending all my time in meetings that, to be honest, a lot of them were completely unnecessary. And so these were the things that I felt were preventing me from getting my work done, that were causing me that stress, that were making me skip my lunch. Now imagine my surprise when I moved to being self-employed and suddenly I was the one who set the meetings. There was no urgent request unless I made it urgent, and for the most part there was no one there to interrupt me. And I still had days where I didn't get what I wanted to do done, despite the fact that I had plenty of time to do it. And so while I had always been aware of the difference between interruptions and distractions, it wasn't really until I had to, I suppose, look in the mirror and ask myself, how much am I preventing myself from getting my work done, that I realised the importance of distractions. And that's why I want to talk about it today, because I think if you can become a little bit more aware of the role distraction plays in your workday, then you can make a few small tweaks, nothing major, that will really make a big difference. So let's talk first about the difference between interruptions and distractions. And I've covered this in past episodes, but just in case you're new or in case you need a reminder. An interruption is when somebody else or something else pulls you away from what you should be doing. So we'll just use technology as an example. If you get a ping, like an email notification, that would be a digital interruption. Or a non-tech example would be if, somebody came up and tapped you on the shoulder. A distraction, on the other hand, is when you drag yourself away from your work. So that could be that you get distracted by noticing the email count number badge on your phone and you're like, oh, that's interesting, maybe I'll go check that. Or maybe you're distracted by, the view out the window, and it pulls you away. So that's the difference. And as I said, we do spend a lot of time talking about interruptions at work. When I do workshops and webinars and different things, we're always talking about how to manage interruptions and how to make sure if people are interrupting each other, it's worthwhile. But we rarely talk about the distraction piece. And there are a few different reasons why we get distracted. And I think it's important to understand what they are and to recognise that not all of them are bad and not all of them are removable, but definitely awareness of them helps you manage your expectations around your day and probably helps you get back on track if you need to. So one of the biggest form of distraction is quite simple mind wandering. That is that you're in the middle of doing a task. Maybe it's mundane, maybe it's a little bit boring, and all of a sudden your mind goes somewhere else. Like it goes to the sun holiday that you can't wait to book. It goes to the grocery list. It goes to another project that you're looking forward to working on. Or it just doesn't go anywhere in particular, but it definitely does not stay on the work that you're doing. And mind wandering is normal. Like, we are human. We only have so much capacity for paying attention and staying focused on tasks. And so it is something which, is part of life. And all I'd say on that, I suppose, is if we are mind wandering, to recognize there are some benefits of it. So for example, if you let the mind wander, you might come up with a new idea, you might connect dots in a different way, you might see a novel approach to something, or it might draw your attention to something that actually maybe you should focus on. So it's not to say it's a bad thing. It can also maybe ease your stress levels if you've been working on a very intense piece of work, and then the mind wandering allows you just to relax and chill and just have a mental break. So I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think the challenge is returning from it and actually getting back to work. And so when we're talking about things to manage our distractions later on, I think with mind wandering, the biggest thing is not staying there for too long and also returning to the right work when you do come back to focus. Now, another thing that can make us really distracted is multitasking, and not in the way that you think. So you might already know that multitasking is a bit of a myth in the sense that you can't pay attention to two things at once. If you've ever been walking and talking to a friend at the same time, you'll know this. So, you are walking along and you're not really paying attention to the fact that you're walking and you're really engrossed in the conversation. And then, I don't know, like a truck comes along or something happens on the road and you stop talking to pay attention to you moving, to pay attention to you walking. And that's because you can't pay attention to both at the same time. All right. Or, you might be just strolling along and all of a sudden you have to stop walking because it's such an important part of the conversation. And so you can't even do something on a subconscious level at the same time. So that's normal. And that really is, the idea that you can pay attention to one thing. But in work, when we talk about multitasking, what we're actually doing is switching between different types of work pretty quickly. So, you're opening up the email and then you're flipping back over the Excel spreadsheet to update something else. And then while that's updating, you go back over to your Teams and you update a message. And then you go over to, some other system and you put in a query. And while that's generating, you go back to the Excel spreadsheet and you know the way it goes. That's not you multitasking. That's you hopping between lots of different types of work, in a short period of time. And what we find with the multitasking is this constant switching forces the brain to kind of prioritize flexibility over stability. So it teaches us to be able to bounce from thing to thing, from topic to topic, which is good, if you're in a job that requires that. But if we get so used to being flexible, then it really makes it hard for us to stick on one topic. So it makes it hard then for you to concentrate on a particular thing for a long period of time. And I would have seen this a lot now in my career, to be fair, because there would have been roles that I was in. And I'm kind of thinking back now to when I was in, operational roles and they were really busy and I was required to hop from one thing to the next. And, that flexibility was part of my role and I did it very well. But then when I moved into a different team and they were focused on research and I was looking at internal communications in the workplace and I had to try and, stick to a topic for a period of time, I found it really hard. I found it really hard to not get distracted because I was so used to bouncing. And so again, it's about maybe just kind of taking a look at your work pattern and seeing if, what you do most of the time is helping you or hindering you when it comes to doing other types of work. And just a side note on this, I think I might have mentioned this in a past episode, but if you are distracted or interrupted a lot at the start of the day, or if you multitask a lot at the start of the day, using this example, you're more likely to distract yourself later on in the day, even if no one interrupts you, because you've kind of started the day in a fragmented, switchy mode. But if you start the day focused and not being interrupted and monotasking, then you're less likely to get distracted because you've started in a focused zone. So that's kind of interesting to note if you've got some flexibility over your schedule. And we'll talk about a few more things that we can do again in a while. So they're kind of two big things. But then there's a few other bits and pieces. So I remember my first job after college, it was really, really stressful. And I had very little control over what was going on. Basically, I started in a role, they hired two of us, so I ended up kind of finding a different job for myself. And that company was going through a lot of restructuring and I had probably way more responsibility than I should have had. And I didn't have any support. So I felt like I was responsible for an awful lot of people and a lot of decisions, but I couldn't really do anything about it. I was just the one kind of carrying out the work. Very stressful. Not a lot of autonomy, not a lot of power in terms of the situation. And it was really stressful. And so I found I was constantly just trying to escape into anything else except that work. So, I'd be browsing websites, I'd be checking my phone, I'd be trying to get involved in other projects, I'd be, going for another cup of coffee, or a cup of tea, I don't even drink coffee. But, I'd be just constantly doing anything except that work. I couldn't focus on it because it was really, really stressful. And, it's quite interesting that, high levels of stress in work or, high levels of feeling like you can't do anything about it causes us to want to kind of escape to somewhere where we do have a bit of control and it's not stressful, which is why apps like Candy Crush or social media sites or all those kind of things are so easy to visit and to be distracted by. if work is very, very stressful. And so I'm kind of saying that really just to remind you that, it's not always because you don't want to work that maybe you're kind of doing that behavior. Maybe sometimes it's because the job itself is really stressful, or you don't feel you're supported, or you don't feel you can change anything. And then of course, like there's the kind of obvious things then around the environment, because like if distraction is us pulling our attention away, it could be the noise levels aren't kind of suiting for us. And I think this is very personal. I know some people find that they have to work in periods of silence. Some people have to work with white noise or pink noise. Some people have to work, with kind of like an acoustic chill playlist. But basically, if the noise level doesn't match what you need, that can prevent you from focusing and cause you to be more distracted. And I really noticed this, by the way, since the move to hybrid working and, people having worked from home for a long time and then going back into the offices. I noticed that the radio had disappeared. So like I'm really old school, but like, back when I used to work in the office initially, there was always a radio or some kind of something on in the background, quite low din. And so it kind of like just kind of created a little bit of noise without being kind of too obtrusive, and it kind of muffled conversations from your peers as well, And I go into offices these days and I visit lots of different companies in different industries, and of course it's lovely to visit them. And by the way, I always have a good nose at the canteen. I'm always so curious to see how is your canteen or your kitchen set up. But one thing I have noticed as well is it's so quiet. Like there is no noise, and I'm like, that's probably great for some people, but others would find that quite distracting. And so that's something which I think, can be very much in our control, thanks to things like headphones and all that kind of stuff. But it's those small things that can cause us to be more distracted at work. And, relate to that as well. It could be like if you're too hot or too cold, or, like if your chair is wrong and those kind of things. But the other piece for me is, when we're kind of worrying about things, we can get distracted. When we're worrying about work kind of specifically. So you probably can relate to this, that you're at work and you're working on one thing, but you're worried about something else. And so your mind keeps bringing you back to that other task. And that can be really hard then to focus on the thing that you should be doing, because you're worried or you're stressed or you're trying to figure out that other thing. And I find that in busy workplaces where there's lots to be done and, just deadlines come up the whole time, that worry about the other work is a big factor when it comes to being distracted. And so you kind of feel then, of course, you must go and multitask. And I forgot to mention, when it came to the noise piece, just to kind of go back to that a second, one of the hardest things for me when I stopped working in an office was hearing my kids. Like something about hearing your children's voices, if you have children who might relate to this, or just hearing particular conversations, like I could not focus. Because of course, like, I was their mother, I suppose, and at some level, I'm wired to pay attention to their voices in case they need me. But I found it so hard. And I remember I used to turn on talk radio to try and balance that out. But again, just kind of coming back to that for a moment, when it comes to like the hybrid or remote or wherever you're working, just pay attention to the specifics of your environment and what could be within your control there, but also what you just have to kind of work around or deal with. So with all that, I suppose the question has to be asked is, does it matter if you're distracted? Well, to a degree it doesn't, because nobody is productive all day long. And I've said that time and time again, but it does matter, because it means that it takes you longer to get your work done, which means the deadlines catch up and come on top of each other, which means you're more stressed. And I don't want that. So I want you to have the best workday you can have, even on the really busy days. And distractions, too much of them, can really railroad that. And for a couple of reasons. One of the reasons is that we don't often go back to the same thing that we've been working on. So we have lots of unfinished tasks. And, even if we do go back to it, we're kind of after hopping around a little bit. So everything seems to take a bit longer. And then obviously we might also lose flow. So if you're doing something creative, you might lose your momentum. It might take you longer to get back into it. You might make errors if you've stopped somewhere and you can't pick back up. There's all that. So we definitely want to manage them. Although I would say to eliminate them is probably a little bit harsh. So there's a few things you can do depending on, your job and your personal situation, and which of these, I suppose, are standing out most to you. And the first is with the mind wandering one I mentioned to you. If you find your mind wandering, that's fine. But like once you catch it, ask yourself, is now the time? Is now the time to be going off down there, or should I pick this back up on my lunch break? And then try to take a moment to ask yourself, what was I working on? So to go back into the same thing that you had been doing before you drifted off. And a really good thing to do if you find yourself, just kind of mind wandering a bit too much or just getting distracted by too many things, is to set a couple of reminders on your calendar for key points in the day where you want to start working on a certain task, or you want to be brought back to work, so that if you get distracted, you get a ding. I'd usually kind of have 2 or 3 of these during the day, nothing too crazy, but it's just a reminder that if you get off track, it's like, come back. What are you supposed to be doing? Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing? And even if you're not being distracted, actually, that's a really good way for you to check if you're doing what you should be doing during that period of the day. Now, if you're multitasking a lot, as I said to you there a while back, one of the things you can do is, first of all, understand, is your job a job where you should be very flexible in terms of your ability to respond to different things and switch modes? If it is, well then, don't beat yourself up about it. That's the job. But if you have to focus for, solving problems or creating new things, or, like really paying deep attention to pieces of work, maybe looking at where you schedule that or how you tee up the day could help you. And one thing that I find is good for this is, even if you've had a very distracted morning or a very fragmented morning, if you take a good lunch break, and even get out for a walk and, really separate the morning from the afternoon, you can kind of reclaim the afternoon as one that's less distracted. All right. So if you're in a mixed role, I think that's important for you to understand that you can actually segment the day into chunks and, try to, as best you can, create boundaries between them so you can get back on track if that morning had been quite distracted. And when it comes to things like the noise and stuff, then really it's about looking at what's in your control. Like, I know in some kind of ideal world, every work environment, be that home, office, wherever, would be like hyper personalized to our needs. But to be fair, our needs are all so different, and there's only so much even the best facilities team can do. So I think it's a little bit unrealistic of us to expect everything to be tailored and optimal for us. I'm a big fan of, focusing on what's in your boat, what you can do. So, for me, it's having headphones, it's having a blanket for my lap when I get cold. It's for like just those small things in my control that I could do to make the environment a bit better, that I don't need anyone else to help me with. And so maybe that's something that you can do. And even this idea of, especially because noise can be such a helper, really, if you need to focus, if you're trying to be less distracted, like, is there certain music that you can really get into the zone with for different types of work? And are you using noise to your advantage? Funnily, because I spent so long in the tech sector, I love going to co-working spaces. If I'm very stressed now, I'd go into a co-working space and I would try to sit next to like engineers or technical people, and I just listen to them talk about stuff that I have no idea now anymore what they're talking about, but they just talk about all this technical stuff, and I find it so calming. I just find it so calming. I'm like, oh my God, thank you for like just bringing me back to this kind of level of working. And I'm able to work away next to them. And it's funny that I think as we get more experience in work, we know what will help us focus. And if you think about it for a few minutes, you kind of probably know what's going to get you distracted as well. So tuning into those things and making the most of what you can, I think, is really good. But when it comes to the stress and worry piece, I think these are ones that you can't do on your own. Okay, like, as much as I am all about, let's us take the steps. But if work is stressing you out, or if you feel like you can't make an impact, or you can't change anything, or you're powerless in a certain situation at work, you will probably be more distracted because you will escape something you can control to something that you do have power over, whether that's other work, which maybe isn't as important, whether it's, being on your phone or shopping or whatever it is that you're doing. We are going to be pulled away from an environment that's hyper stressed. And so if that's you, I think it's a good time for you, maybe listen to this, to think about what's causing the stress. Is there somebody in work that you can talk to? Obviously, if any managers listening to this is why psychological safety is so important. So your team feel that they can come talk to you. But is there someone you can talk to? And is there a way that you can get more control or agency or responsibility over even some elements of your work, of that piece of work, and like focus on, you might not be able to control the whole thing, but are there parts of it that you can take ownership of? And that really, really makes a difference. And then, to be fair, there might be times where the work is not the stuff we're stressed about. Kind of going back to that time there, like where I was working upstairs and I was listening to my kids. Sure, the work was grand. Do you know, it was me worrying about being a mom that was stressing me out. Do you know what I mean? And I think we've all been there where like work is fine. It's like life that's distracting us. It's life that's calling us away. And when that's the case, it's just so, so important to have someone to talk to, isn't it? And like, it doesn't matter who it is, as long as it's someone who you can have a chat with. And, I'm a big fan of taking a 15-minute phone call with a friend, or probably my mom, to be fair, during the workday, and just getting it all off my mind. And then I'm actually able to go back and just get the job done, rather than feeling like we should keep that time until the evening or the weekend. Because, well, number one, you might not make that phone call. And number two, well, it's impacting you now. So should you not address it now, if you can at all? So for today, what I'd love you to do, if this is resonating with you, if you're thinking, Niamh, do you know what, you're right. Like I am interrupted a lot and there's lots of meetings, but now that you mention it, there's been days where I haven't been interrupted and I'm still the one, clicking on the icons or, kind of browsing the extra site or staring out the window. What I want you to do is just pay attention to the kind of work that you're doing at the moment. And, is the way that you approach your workday and the way that you set up your environment creating a space that allows you to focus, if that's what you need to do, creates a space that allows you to be responsive, if that's what you need to do, or creates room or space for you to switch modes, if that's what you need to do. And I know an awful lot of people need to switch between being flexible and being focused. So it's about kind of creating those breaks within the day. And then maybe just kind of think about, which of these things, like the mind wandering, the multitasking, the noise and environment, or the stress and worry, are having the most impact on you. And is there anything you can do today, even a small thing, to alleviate that or to reduce the impact it has on your work, so you can get a few more bits and pieces done, so you can switch off at the end of the day feeling that you got more stuff done off the list and you can enjoy the rest of your evening or whatever it is that you're planning on doing. And wouldn't that be a good ending? All right. So look, if you found this episode helpful, what I'd love you to do is leave a rating or a review, because that helps me know that this is an episode that you find helpful, a good topic, and it helps other people find me. And share it with a friend or a colleague who you think would benefit from it as well. Or, even have a chat at the next team meeting or the next time you catch them for a coffee to see, is there anything you can do to help each other maybe be less distracted at work. That's it from me. Until next time, stay well and have a better workday.